Welcome to the Women in International Law Interest Group Prominent Women in International Law program. My name is Milena Asterio, and I'm co chair of ASIL's Women in International Law Interest Group. On behalf of myself, co chair Professor Nienke Grossman, and the WILIG Steering Committee, I'm happy to welcome you to the WILIG Annual Meeting Program. WILIG's mission is to promote and enhance the careers of women in the field of international law, as well as to promote awareness of gender and international law. We have been busy working toward our mission this year through a number of activities, including our mentoring program, the awarding of a new scholarship prize to highlight and promote excellence in international law scholarship involving women and girls, gender and feminist approaches, several co sponsored events and panels, and a new initiative with the Harvard International Law Journal highlighting distinguished and diverse voices in international law. And of course, today we're honored to gather to celebrate a prominent woman in international law, Judge Gabrielle Kirk Mcdonald. As you may know, the Prominent Woman in International Law Award is given each year to an individual who has advanced women, gender, or women's rights in international law. The Willig Subcommittee on the Prominent Woman in International Law Prize, chaired by Meg de Guzman, selected Judge McDonald because of her long and distinguished career in international law and her extensive and important contributions to racial and gender justice and her contributions to international law overall. Let me turn the microphone over to Nienke Grossman now for a few additional remarks before we begin our formal program.
Thank you, Milena. None of these great WILIG initiatives would have been possible without the WILIG team, which includes Luli Hemmingson, the Mentoring Program Coordinator, Tati Sainati, WILIG Secretary, WILIG's excellent steering committee members, and Regine Lotlakar, who volunteered to help with the mentoring program this year as well. We thank them all for their commitment and dedication to WILIG in the past year. On behalf of myself and the steering committee, I would like to take a moment to thank Milena for her excellent service to WILIG over the past 3 years. It has been a genuine pleasure to work with and learn from her. I will miss our collaboration as co-chairs, but I am so glad we will continue to benefit from her knowledge and expertise through her continued service on the steering committee. We are also happy to announce that Meg de Guzman will be our new WILIG co-chair. I'm excited to work with her in the coming years as well. Also, we would like to express our gratitude to ASIL's leadership and staff, including Mark, Wes, Ben, Matthew, and Jimmy, for their thoughtful engagement and participation and partnership with us every step of the way. Because we are not physically in person this year, as last year, attendees cannot introduce themselves as they would have during the luncheon. We encourage each of you to put your name and title in the chat so that we can virtually introduce ourselves to each other. I am now honored to introduce Catherine Amerfar to welcome all of you with a few words on behalf of ASIL. She is president of ASIL and a litigation partner and co-chair of the Public International Law Group at Debevoise and Plimpton.
Thank you so much. I just want to take a moment to extend my warmest congratulations to WILIG, to our wonderful co-chairs, Nienke and Milena, on all of the extraordinary work, the extraordinary and very necessary work that they do to promote the advancement of women in our profession and in the American Society of International Law. As they well know, the annual WILIG Luncheon is a highlight of the annual meeting. It's one of my favorite events. I recall year after year going to gather, and although we cannot break bread together this year, we can still gather to celebrate the achievements of women like today's honoree. As the seventh woman elected to the presidency of the Society in our 115-year history, I am particularly honored to join with you today to honor Judge Gabby McDonald, who we all know, who we all love, a very distinguished jurist whom the Society has honored on several occasions, and we'll go into some of those occasions soon. Gabby has broken barriers throughout her life and career and has been a singular role model and inspiration for many, many, many women, men alike, myself very much included. And it's just so special to be here with all of you to see her honored. I have another pleasure and privilege, which is to introduce a very good friend of ours, Betsy Anderson, who is the executive director of the World Justice Project. Betsy leads the project's global efforts to advance the rule of law through research, strategic convenings, and support for innovative programs. And Betsy, of course, is very well known to us. Betsy has more than 20 years experience in the international legal arena, including as our beloved executive director here at the Society. And as we all know, she's had an incalculable impact on shaping the Society. Betsy, welcome back, welcome home, and over to you.
Catherine, thank you so much and welcome everyone. It's great to be at another Willig luncheon with you. I only wish we could be together. I've got this background photo from the 2014 Willig luncheon so that I would feel a little bit less alone in my Zoom box. It's a great honor for me to introduce to you this year's Willig Prominent Woman in International Law honoree, Judge Gabrielle Kirk Mcdonald. I first met Judge Mcdonald 26 years ago, probably almost to the day. It was the spring of 1995, and I was a baby lawyer serving as a legal assistant at the Yugoslavia Tribunal. And sitting in the back benches as the judges, including Judge Mcdonald, were meeting to refine the tribunal's rules of procedure and evidence. Judge Mcdonald was an impressive and commanding presence in those negotiations. And I remember watching and thinking, I want to be like her. In the negotiations of those rules, Judge Mcdonald had the benefit of being one of the few judges in the room who had actually presided over a criminal trial before. Also, like any good lawyer, she knew the advantage gained by taking the pen in a negotiation. Word had it that she had arrived to the negotiations having written the first draft of the rules. She knew her stuff and she was prepared. I have come now to appreciate that this was vintage take charge Judge Mcdonald. She has, in a career distinguished by many firsts, many bests, many onlys, been again and again writing and rewriting the rules. Through her advocacy, achievements, and example, she has persistently been bending our moral arc toward justice. Judge Mcdonald's early life was shaped by a strong mother who instilled in her a commitment to social justice and a thirst for education. She took that inspiration to Howard University Law School, where she was determined to become a civil rights lawyer and knew that was the place to get that training. She graduated first in her class and in the mid-60s joined the trailblazing legal team at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, working on landmark school desegregation, housing, and voting rights cases there before moving to Texas, where as one of a few African Americans regularly appearing in federal courts, she made a name for herself through a successful private practice helping plaintiffs obtain redress for employment discrimination. That brought her to the attention of Senator Lloyd Bentsen and in turn to President Carter, who in 1979 nominated her at the age of 37 to a seat as a federal district judge in the Southern District of Texas, becoming the first African American appointed to the federal bench in Texas and only the third African American woman appointed to the federal bench in the entire United States. On the bench, Judge Mcdonald became known as fair, effective, and judicious, paving the way to her 1993 nomination as one of the first judges appointed to the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. There, she made significant contributions to a number of landmark cases, including as the presiding judge in the court's first trial, the trial of Duško Tadić. She was nominated and reelected to a second term on the ICTY, and then elected by her fellow judges to serve as the court's president, the only woman to have ever occupied that role at the court. Judge Mcdonald left the ICTY in 1999 and in 2003 commenced yet another phase of international service when she was appointed as one of the American arbitrators of the Iran U.S. Claims Tribunal, serving as the only woman on that 9-member body until her retirement in 2013. Judge Mcdonald's career is one of those that sounds like it must have taken 3 or 4 lifetimes. The Prominent Woman in International Law Award is just the latest among many honors and awards that she has received in recognition of her long and distinguished service to the causes of justice, rights, and international law. There are 2 aspects of Judge Mcdonald's career that warrant particular attention, reflection, and admiration today, I think. First, throughout her career, Judge Mcdonald has been a teacher, a mentor, and a role model, work that we hold dear and take pride in Willig. Judge Mcdonald has taught a number of courses at various universities and been a frequent guest lecturer. But beyond those formal roles, she has served in informal ways as a mentor to many a student, law clerk, or young lawyer, as I can well attest. She has written powerfully of the impact of mentors on her own life and has paid that forward. In her own words, quote, "African Americans need to tell our stories and tell them again, not only to record what we did so as to assure it be part of the larger history of Americans, but also to offer proof of what is possible." Unquote. In 2014, when we asked Judge Mcdonald to assume a new role as honorary president of ASIL, Judge Mcdonald called me to say, "Betsy, I'll do this, but I don't want to just be honorary. I want to do something. I want to work on the underrepresentation of Black people in international law and in the ASIL." And thus, BASIL, or Blacks of the American Society of International Law, was born and has been working since to profile Black scholarship, to tell the stories of African Americans in international law, to support and mentor aspiring lawyers of color, and to otherwise serve as a much needed force for diversity and inclusion in the society and in our field as a whole. Judge Mcdonald, you have shown us what is possible, and we are much indebted to you for this leadership. The second feature of Judge Mcdonald's career that I want to highlight is that she has believed in and embodied in her work and in her life the interconnectedness of US civil rights and global human rights. Her worldview was shaped on this by an early mentor at Howard, another revered name in ASIL circles, Goler Teal Butcher. Judge Mcdonald has carried the torch forward as a clear and persistent voice, connecting the dots between the struggle for justice at home here in the United States and around the world, underscoring that one agenda cannot proceed without the other. That's a voice we need to hear now more than ever as we grapple with hate crimes and police brutality and the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on communities of color, all pointing to systemic injustice in this country that is very much a global human rights priority. So let me let you hear that voice now, and please join me in congratulating Judge Mcdonald and thanking her for her many contributions to our field and to the cause of justice here in the United States and around the world. Judge Mcdonald.
Thank you, Betsy. Everyone can tell that you're a dear friend, and it's so nice to hear all the good things about me. Thank you so much. I remember attending a Willig luncheon many years ago when we could all fit in a small breakfast room of the Fairmont Hotel. Now, Willig luncheons are sold out. If you do not get your ticket early, you will be out of luck. I believe that this popularity is due not only to the increase in the number of women in international law, but rather it is an appreciation of Willig's role in this growth. Its strong mentoring program tells young women that Willig has their back. Yet women of color are leaving the profession in shocking numbers. The recent report by the ABA, Women in the Profession, Left Out and Left Behind, finds 81% of minority female associates left law firms within 5 years of their being hired. And minority women are only 15% of the population, so to speak, of the firms, whereas women constitute 50%. Why is this so? What created it? What can we do about it? Our common gender makes white and Black women natural allies, but Black women have two distinct identities that may expose them to different treatment. Or it may be the combination of these overlapping and intersecting identities that explain this inequity under both race and gender. Willig has recently widened its focus and has partnered with the Minorities in International Law Interest Group at AZLE and has plans for several joint panels with the Basel Task Force when this pandemic lets up. It seems Willig has taken to heart the admonition of the renowned Black feminist Audrey Lorde in her essay, Letter to Mary Daly, which is collected in Sister Outsider. And she said that there is commonality in the feminist movement because the oppression of women knows no ethnic nor racial boundaries. I'm honored to receive the Prominent Women in International Law Award from my sisters in the law. Thank you very much. Did you want me to show the award? Okay. It is beautiful. I received it and I opened it just to make sure that it was there. But then I put it away because I didn't think that I should stare at it until it was given to me. Can you see it? It's lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for those remarks. We are honored to give you this award this year, and we're truly honored to have you with us today. And I think, as many of us have expressed, it would have been amazing to be able to do this in person, but this is the best that we can do under the circumstances. Judge Mcdonald has kindly agreed to engage in a conversation with us, followed by a Q&A from the audience. So let's start our conversation at the beginning of your career. As Betsy just described, after graduating from Harvard Law School, you focused on civil rights and the
Howard.
Howard Law School. I'm sorry, Howard
in
Law.
Washington, D.C.
Howard Law School.
Thank you. I have nothing against Harvard.
Howard Law School.
Love Howard Law. Thank you.
Thank you for the correction. Apologies.
No problem.
You focused on civil rights and the fight for racial justice in the United States. What made you turn towards international law?
Well, the precipitating cause, so to speak, was that I was invited to serve on the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. But it really was not that improbable. Betsy alluded to this in her remarks because at Howard University, there had been an interconnectedness between civil rights law and international law. For example, also, as Bessie said, Goler Teal Butcher, who is one of the heroines within ASL, was a professor. Actually, she came a little bit after me, and then she passed in 1993 when I became a judge on the ICTY. You know, I never met her, even though I was at Howard a lot, because I was on the board for 23 years. I loved every minute of it. But I never met her. So I've read a lot about her. Henry Richardson, who is a very strong member of ASL, and as a matter of fact, we call him the Dean of Black Lawyers within ASL, has called her the mother of all Black international lawyers. So I was aware of her presence and I was aware of her contributions. She said in an article, and she used to tell her students, that civil rights are human rights writ large. And I found that to be true. My dean, as a matter of fact, when I was at the law school, was Clarence Clyde Ferguson. Clarence Clyde Ferguson became the first Black president of the American Society of International Law and the only Black president. And he began his international law career as a civil rights lawyer. So it wasn't really that improbable. There is that connection, and I was able to apply it in many instances while I was there.
Thank you, Judge Mcdonald. And I also just wanted to thank you for your remarks about Willig. We're very proud of our partnerships with Millig and Basil, and we look forward to continuing those partnerships going forward. And also, it's interesting to think about what you just said about civil rights and human rights, and the discourse within the Black Lives Matter movement has also very much picked up on human rights and framing the racial justice fight in the United States as a human rights dispute, which is not new, as we know, but has come up again. The idea that human rights is part of the Black Lives Matter movement, you know, and has been part of the fight for racial justice throughout the civil rights movement, I think is really important for us all to keep in mind. So after your service as a federal district court judge, you became a judge on the ICTY. How did your commitment to civil rights and your experiences as a Black woman from the United States influence your approach to international law and transitional justice?
Thank you, Aninka. In many ways, you know, when you're involved in the process, you really don't know why you're approaching things a certain way. But as I look back upon it, I can see the influence of both my race and my gender, but also the experiences that I had. I guess one of the major ways that I was influenced was the way that I looked at the conflict and the purpose of the tribunal as a whole. It was not just to establish principles of international humanitarian law, because international humanitarian law for so long went unapplied. That is, treaties had become basically paper tigers because they weren't enforced. So I didn't look at the tribunal's purpose that way. Instead, my focus really was on the region. I knew that the people needed to heal. And we were given a mandate by the Security Council, a very broad and ambitious mandate to help to bring about international peace and security in the region. But I knew that if they didn't understand our process, and we were hundreds of miles away, we could have no effect on them. They wouldn't believe that they had received justice. So as part of that, when I was president, I initiated what we called the outreach program. And by that, it was to do just what I said, to reach out, to bring the tribunal as much as possible to the region. I sent one of my law clerks to the region to get a feel for the opinions of people in the region about the tribunal, and it was shocking. I'll tell you. We were supposed to help, but they were not very impressed with us. So we developed the outreach program really as a presidential initiative. I was fortunate to have the support of the registrar, Dorothy Sampaio, and you notice that she is a woman also. Sometimes our male colleagues have tunnel vision, and they don't see kind of the way that many women see things and want to bring people together. And so it's kind of this attitude that was both, I think, impacted by my race and my gender. Then, of course, I knew from the history, really, of the civil rights movement that law alone will not change people's attitudes. We have to go forward with law, but it takes a while sometimes, if ever, to change attitudes. So I looked at the conflict that way. And then the first trial that we had, and the accused was Dusko Tadic, as Betsy mentioned, was from an area in the northeast of Bosnia, Kozarac. And the principal of the high school in that region testified. And he said that this was the most integrated school in Bosnia, where Muslims, Croats, and Bosnian Serbs attend school. And I was seeing parallels in race relations in our country with the conflict. Because, of course, at one point, it was thought that desegregation of the schools would cure all of the evils. Well, it hasn't worked out that way. And it didn't work out that way in Bosnia either. So I questioned him very closely about that because I wanted to learn from that, not only to prepare the judgment, because I thought that we had to tell a story in the judgment, but to see what I could learn for race relations in the United States. The other thing is it's related, was the role of propaganda in the conflict. It's true that there had been more than friction, but violence, really, between the groups. But at least in Kozarac, it's true that they lived in relative peace. They intermarried, the groups intermarried. So what happened to make ordinary people, and they were ordinary people, commit these violent and horrific crimes? And we know that it was the impact of the virulent propaganda that was disseminated by leaders who were interested in power and territorial gain. And it was kind of you better get them before they get you. And unfortunately, again, we see that happening and has happened in the past in the United States. As a matter of fact, a Serbian journalist testified during the Tadic case. He said that if someone like David Duke took over all of the media in the United States and constantly barraged the community with this hatred, he said, you too would have a conflict in the United States. And I had two judges. It was a 3-judge panel, and Judge Lalvora from Malaysia said, who is David Duke? Well, I knew who David Duke was, and I could see the parallels. So those were just some. Then again, the importance of, again, the rules, Betsy. Betsy, you know me better than I do. At least you know a lot about me. When we were drafting the rules of procedure and evidence, we were to give special emphasis on sexual violence and the protection of victims and witnesses. And I remember really in my youth serving on panels with Sarah Weddington in Houston, and I was a young lawyer, and she had argued Roe versus Wade. And one session I remember, I happened to be speaking, and in walked protesters carrying placards with horrible photographs of fetuses. I was shocked. I turned to her and I said, what do I do? She said, keep speaking. And I did keep speaking. And I knew also that Black women in the United States are disproportionately subjected to rape. I had kind of a fleeting involvement with feminism, or the growth of feminism. This was in the early 70s. I was friends with Frances Farenthold, and we don't hear too much about her, though she's still alive. She was born in the 20s, I believe. She became the first national chairperson of the National Women's Political Caucus. And she invited me to speak at the convention in Houston. And at that time, I was deeply involved in racial discrimination cases and had, the managers, presidents of company on the witness stand, all of whom were white males. And so I said and told her, I let her know before I spoke, I said, I'm taking a wait and see attitude because I'm spending every day fighting the white male patriarchy. And I don't know that I'm ready to substitute the great white woman for the great white father. She understood, and we developed a deep friendship in the 1990s. I remember visiting her because she would have salons, so to speak, at her house. So I had a lot of influences in my life, and relating to my race and gender that affected the way that I looked at things. That's just a few of them. There are others if you'd like to hear more stories.
Well, we definitely have more questions. So
Okay.
yes, we would love to hear more stories. And actually, my next question has to do with your work on the other tribunals. In addition to the ICTY, you were also a judge on the Tokyo Women's Tribunal and also the Iran United States Claims Tribunal. These are three very different adjudicatory bodies. What are you most proud about your service on these tribunals? Please tell us more stories, if you will, about your service on the three different tribunals.
Well, I'd like to, if I may, choose a different tribunal, or it's not really a tribunal. I'd like to choose the federal judiciary. rather than the Iran U.S. Claims Tribunal. It's true, though, that I was the first woman to serve as an arbitrator in the 9-person, I almost said 9-men tribunal. It's not that way anymore because a woman followed me when I resigned, and I hope it's a woman's seat or one of the women's seats. So it was an experience. I spent a lot of time talking about it at the ITA interview a couple of days ago. It was a mixed bag. I'm still talking about it, and I said I wasn't going to anyway. ICTY first. That to me was the confluence of all of my careers, so to speak, that I had. You know, I had been a professor of law, I had been a civil rights lawyer, and I had been a federal judge. And I've really been blessed with these opportunities. Sometimes I think that someone else was moving things for me. I particularly think that when I remember that my mother, who was biracial, but who looked white, leased an apartment in Riverdale. And I was 8 years old, so that was whatever year it was. And I showed up. And when I showed up, all things broke out. And I think this was the first time really that I experienced racism. And I can remember being called the N-word and me running home. I'm not a fighter. I'm a runner, or I used to be a runner. And I remember it, and it just went on and on, even went on in the complex. I had one friend, really, an Irish woman whose father was a fireman. And I remember her, Mary Ann Heffernan. And I'm not on Facebook, but I would love to see her again because she was my buddy. But do you know what street that complex in Riverdale was located on? Netherlands Avenue. You see, maybe that was telling me something. You know, Gabby, you can do it. It's waiting for you, you know? It'll get better. I don't know. But the federal judiciary, well, so ICTY, and I've already spoken to that, really gave me an opportunity to apply many of my life experiences and my legal experiences. The Tokyo Women's Tribunal was a fantastic opportunity. We had the hearing in 2000 in Tokyo. I was proud, even though I was not closely involved, in the fact that it was created. You know, this was not a tribunal that had the force of law. Rather, it was created by women's groups that came together and tracked many of the documents of creation that I saw at ITCY. And it was such a different experience. I guess it was grassroots personified, women personified, because we did it. There were probably 1,000 women, or primarily women, in attendance at the hearing. A little bit different than anything I had experienced. But what I was proud of, I think most, was the reaction of the comfort women. The comfort women had serviced the Japanese military, wherever the military was based throughout the world. And if you saw, and I did see photographs of the cabins, you saw men lined up outside. I mean, long line. It looked as if they could have been going to the mess hall or somewhere, but they weren't. They were going to partake of sexual, really, violence, because it was often violent. And these women had not yet really, many of them had the opportunity to tell their story. And they were so appreciative of just the opportunity to speak at a court of law as they saw it, that was reward enough. One woman I remember, and we recently had Nika, you attended that a conference that we had to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Tribunal. The hearing was sometimes moving. I remember this woman testified, and these women were in their 70s or more really. And she was just overcome, and she just collapsed and was taken out. So I was the presiding judge with 4 other persons, Carmen Azerbay, who had been an ad hoc judge at the ICTY, Christine Chinkin, who is a feminist lawyer, and Willie Matunga, who was he became the chief of the Chief Justice in the Kenyan Supreme Court. In any case, I called a recess, and when we returned, I was trying to calm both the spectators and the women who were there, the comfort women. And I saw this film. I saw this film of the proceedings, and as I was doing that, I saw tears coming down my face. And I don't remember that. I mean, I had no conscious knowledge of reacting that way. So it was sad, but it was very gratifying. And then, of course, the federal judiciary was kind of the foundation. That's how I learned to preside over cases. I had been a litigator, one of only 2 women, and this again would have been in the 70s, that practiced regularly in the federal courts. The other woman was a criminal lawyer, and I was so impressed with her. She was such a good lawyer. And she wore this long black mink coat. Marion Rosen was her name. But it really was the 2 of us. But I spent a lot of time litigating, not in Houston, but in East Texas with my husband. We had a firm, Mcdonald, and we went all over the state, primarily representing persons who were either employed or sought to be employed in the petrochemical industry, but steel mills as well. So I appreciated the opportunity. It was confining, it was challenging, being the first woman and the only Black woman, only Black person. I had to teach one of my colleagues how to say Negro. You know, you just, and I turned to him actually and hit my knee. I said, Negro, After we were sworn in, one of my colleagues had a reception. And again, me and my family, we were the only Blacks other than the men who were serving in their black tuxedos and white gloves. And the colleague invited me in the kitchen. He came to me and said, I have somebody I want you to meet. And so, I mean, it was a pretty large reception. And I didn't know everyone there. Well, he took me into the kitchen to see the maid washing dishes. But she was so happy to meet me. She said, I can't wait to tell my daughter. So anyway, I'm kind of gibbering, but that happens sometimes with time. But those three, for different reasons. The federal judiciary, because I also learned how to deal with this situation instead of running as I had when I was 8 or so. The Tokyo Women's Tribunal, and of course the ICTY. That was a beautiful opportunity.
So thank you, Judge Mcdonald. There's so much important history and knowledge that you're sharing with us today. So, you know, one, the Tokyo Women's Tribunal, for example, you've talked a little bit about how meaningful that was to people and how the women took justice into their own hands, so to speak, when they were not able to get it through existing mechanisms. And there's some really interesting scholarship that has come out in the past few years about the Tokyo Women's Tribunal and people's tribunals in general. So I think, one of the themes that comes through in this conversation is also about the limits and potential of the law to help us resolve or address the problems that we face and the oppression of the less fortunate. And you wrote in the Howard Human and Civil Rights Law Review, quote, "The thread that runs through the tapestry of my career is that the law is not an end in itself. Rather, it is to be used as both a sword and a shield. A sword to challenge the oppression of the less fortunate, and a shield to protect them from the tyranny of unjust power." So, through your work and experience, what have you learned about the limits and potential of international justice in challenging the oppression of the less fortunate and shielding them from the tyranny of unjust power? And let me just say, we have about 12 minutes remaining for this session. So I'll just want to share the time limit as we go forward. And I know we could talk about this for much longer than the time we have. And we will invite everybody to join us in the continuing the conversation session that follows this. But I did want to pose this question to you, Judge Mcdonald, for your thoughts.
Well, that was very dramatic. That was something I said in a law review article, and I gave a footnote to Mary McLeod Bethune, who coined that phrase. She was a Black woman activist, scholar, educator, who was the only Black woman to attend the who was in the U.S. delegation for the drafting of the UN Charter. So I used her term, but there are a lot of limits in international law. There are a lot of limits in domestic law. International law, what comes to mind really quickly, and I'll try and be short with the stories, in the interest of time, is the lack of a coercive mechanism. The ICTY, for example, an ad hoc tribunal, could not force states to, or compel states to turn over accused persons. It could ask that they be transferred, even though states had an obligation under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter to comply with any measure that the Security Council adopted to bring about international peace and security. So that lack of coercive force, and that is also true with the International Criminal Court. It's true that states who are signatories are to transfer persons, but again, that compulsion, the coerciveness, the the power to compel attendance hampers. And it's true in domestic as well. You know, one question you asked me about was what had changed to uh, remove roadblocks to equal opportunities for blacks, and why was that so? And as I thought about it, I have a quote from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she said, and this is a quote: "So again, they know what's going on, and if they want," she's talking about white people, "and if they want to change it, they can. But first, they need to understand the historical basis for racism and how it is so pervasive that it becomes an attitude." Again, talking about the ability to change, it becomes an attitude. Anyway, it becomes subconscious, and it's based on perceptions that perhaps maybe to a certain extent are illegitimate because you don't know any better. What I know about, I accept. I was taught not to do that. And then she goes on, and then she says also that there was familiarity with people at the beginning of the civil rights movement. She's speaking there of the comparison between the development of rights for the LGBTQ community with rights for Black Americans. And she was saying that the problem is segregation, that with respect to gays, as she put it, or the gay rights movement, they were intertwined in our community. So it was so much easier. So in terms of an effort to change the world community, so to speak, with respect to gender rights and rights of racial minorities, the limits, there are limits in law, but there are limits simply because of the legal process, and that is that it is designed and only capable of stopping certain actions. But we hope that a change in attitude will follow. That's not always the case.
Thank you. We are quickly running out of time. So with that, we're going to turn to some questions from our audience. Judge Mcdonald has kindly agreed to answer some of those questions. As Betsy mentioned in her introduction, you were instrumental in creating the Blacks of the American Society of International Law group as a space to promote those voices in the field of international law, which has traditionally been white. So, our question to you, and I'm going to combine this with a question from the audience, is what more can be done to promote those voices in international law? And then, as one of our audience members mentioned, do you have any advice for creating space to discuss or advocate for civil rights issues? For example, the Black Lives Matter movement and others in professional settings. So, in other words, how do we do more to create a space for those voices which haven't been traditionally heard, and to make sure that they have a seat at the table at ACL, but also within other professional organizations?
Well, ACL, people say, "Oh, you founded ACL," or "So and so founded Basel." I didn't found Basel. I just put a bug in the ear of the leaders of ASIL by telling them about my experiences and in my capacity as honorary president, and telling them basically I wanted more people who looked like me, and that had not been the case. Now, they could have responded. They could have said, well, Miss Honorary President, why don't you create a committee to do something about it? They didn't do that. Lori Damrosch, who was then president, Donald Donovan, who was outgoing president, and my friend Betsy Anderson, who was the executive director, took it by the horns and founded the Blacks of the American Society of International Law. That's very important. And the story is that if you want change, it has to be done by the leaders of the legal community. And by definition, if you're if you're a group that's trying to knock on the door, you have to rely on them. You know, as I think about it sometimes, I think calling them the new abolitionists, that's really very painful because it takes me back, not me, but takes us back hundreds of years. But that's what you need. You need some new abolitionists, leaders in the international community. ASIL changed ASIL. ASIL is a core activity of ASIL. And as such, there is an obligation for ASIL to work to change within and help to change without. And it was new. You know, I was talking with Wes Riss a couple of days ago, checking on this equipment that I just love to do. And he just volunteered. He said, you know, you have to be anti-racist. You can't just be against racism. And I just was flabbergasted. That was a sea change, not because Wes was ever a racist, but he understands now what is to be done. Times have changed in Black life. The Black Lives Matter movement did a lot of it. Unfortunately, it was followed by the insurrection on January the 6th. And I don't know how much of a pushback that there is. But let's hope that it's picked up because many, 26 million perhaps persons, predominantly white, 95% participated in the movement. I don't know whether I've answered your question fully, but we'll have a chat. And whoever asked the question can explore it with me again.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Judge McDonald. So we want to take a moment to just thank you for your words of wisdom today and for your varied and meaningful contributions both to ASIL through your work in founding BASIL and your contributions to international law and justice more generally. You have given us the opportunity to think and reflect on many important topics, which we hope to continue to reflect on and think about in the weeks, months, and years ahead. We would, on behalf of Milena and Willig and the steering committee, we would like to thank all of you for attending this event. We would like to encourage you to, if you're not a member of Willig, to join Willig, to participate in our events, to help us continue to further our mission. And we encourage you to look at our website on the ASIL interest group page to learn more about Willig and to reach out to us. We're always happy to partner and to think about what more we can do together. We also want to encourage you to join us in, let's continue the conversation using this new wonderful virtual platform that we have. And we thank you again. And that concludes our program for today. Thank you very much. And thank you and congratulations again to Judge McDonald.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.